Hello there, I'm Ali Wallace, founder of DNA Recruit. Welcome to the latest episode of the DNA Download. So being a leader within the agency world is hard. When you get it right, though, there's no better environment to thrive in. But it takes resilience, a deep understanding of how you continuously adapt and react. That's why we created the podcast to help agency leaders share their experience, advice, and tips with others so you can accelerate your agency's growth. I'm excited today to be joined by Simon Hathaway, MD of the EMEA for OUTFORM. Simon's not just a client of mine, he's also someone I've known incredibly well. We worked in the same agency together, Dynamo. He's also been a candidate, so he's had the whole round experience of Ali Wallace. So OUTFORM, they're an award-winning global innovation agency who partner with some of the best-known brands and retailers in the world to transform customer experience through insight, technology, and creativity. And Simon himself, he's been described by many as an inspirational leader. I know that, with experience in both agency and corporate organizations. And he's someone who is recognized as a specialist in retail and a proven track record in building businesses, transforming capability, and growing reputation. But first of all, welcome, Simon. How are you getting on today?
All good. Yeah, it's busy.
What I really wanted to do is just get you to introduce yourself. Just to understand, who you are, what you are, and what you're about.
Cool. All right. Well, I'm Simon Hathaway, and I guess I mean my agency career, if you like, and probably what most people are interested in, sort of started out when I realised I had no idea what I wanted to do, and somebody told me when I was doing a degree in geography, you should be in advertising. So I kind of wrote a letter to Saatchi & Saatchi, who were the big name at the time, and said I want a job, and they wrote back politely telling me to piss off. So I worked out pretty quickly that I had to do more. And that kind of shaped it. Now, ironically, I ended up at Saatchi & Saatchi probably 10 years later. So that kind of drove it. And arguably since then, I've never really quite known exactly what to do with my career. But there has been an ambition and particularly a search for what's new in the industry and new ways of working that have been particularly exciting. So, if I look back at it, that's what's driven what I've enjoyed doing most of all, and what makes me tick is that newness. And I think landing now at OUTFORM, which is really all about innovation, has really kind of brought that together. Part of it, I suppose, is obviously, I'm perhaps most famous for the time at Saatchi X, where, I landed in Saatchi & Saatchi when a interesting young man, quite old now, turned up from Arkansas, having seen the kind of acquisition of Thompson Murray with a guy called Andy Murray, who was very famous back then until another tennis player turned up, and he dropped down to page 16 of Google or whatever. But we kind of did shape the future of this idea of shopper, and really drove it as a kind of insight-driven agency offering. And to be honest, that for most people probably sitting there now going, that's like rubbish now, shopper's rubbish. But at the time, for those first 2 or 3 years, we were outperforming nearly every other agency in the publishers network by about 2 or 3%, because we had an insight-driven model. And yes, it got taken over by a whole gang of ad agencies saying, oh, it's just BTL, and a whole lot of sales promotion agencies that came in and did all those things. And then classically, some of the even printers were saying, I'm now doing shopper marketing. So it kind of lost its way, but that newness was really exciting. Yes. Similarly, that was when we got into digital and digital kind of shopper and digital behaviors, and the mobile device going to Chael. That was really cool. And now at OUTFORM, I mean, I love walking to clients now, which is just why it's great. And they sort of say to me, oh, what, have you got any great ideas on this? Yeah, well, if you look at behaviors, we've got the stat at the moment, 80% of people are using a mobile device in store. So the idea you've got online and offline is kind of ridiculous, because everybody's using their mobile phone in store. So everybody's online all the time. So what's the sort of digital handshake to bring them into your ecosystem? You start to get into that conversation, it becomes very powerful, because it's really relevant as you look at, if you like, the new retail utility. But then they say, well, how do we do it? And that's the bit where I can actually succeed, because in most agencies, and this is the important bit about you kind of driving the newness and the USP, most agencies are sitting there going, yeah, I can give you insight. Yeah, I can give you great creative. They don't actually understand technology. So my piece that I've been, I think, successful through the career, and the thing that continues to drive is finding the USP as an agency that differentiates us from other brands, and actually being able to deliver the technology. The fact we've got facilities that build these things, teams in Shenzhen designing and building that, and it is the big differentiator right now. So for me, keeping that search for new, finding new ways of selling it, really, really quite powerful, and it continues to drive me. That's why I kind of get excited day in, day out, is that kind of piece, and it's embodied in the OUTFORM spirit, which is dare to innovate.
So interesting. We've had a long-term professional relationship, if you like to put it like that, in terms of you've been quite a big person in my career, but where did your journey to becoming MD at OUTFORM start? Because obviously we know before, you talked about RTX, you talked about scale, and also your client side experience.
Sure. I actually ended up doing a postgrad in marketing in an attempt to kind of get into agency, well, not into agency world actually. I thought I just needed to be a marketeer. It was only when I actually went for a job interview in those days. I had those kind of recruitment processes, and I think it was and one of the mutuals, in fact, there might be the people who got my first mortgage from, said, "Simon, I think you should work in an agency." I actually ended up winning a sort of marketing week sales promotion initiative that was going on at the time. So I just sent that out to me. It's like early morning, CV versions of direct mail went out to everybody, and that kind of kicked me off.
Yeah.
And I got into agencies. I started doing stuff which was fun. I then sort of got a bit bored, took some time out, did some ski seasons and a bit of stuff on yachts. Actually, was brilliant because I really understood as a result of that kind of customer service and what this really meant, and how to manage. When you've got a person in a ski resort and the boiler breaks down, they can't have a hot shower or a bath after a busy day. You really need to understand how you handle that person, which is not quite the same as missing a print deadline or something like that.
They're pretty pissed.
So exactly. So you kind of I got a good understanding of how to deal with people. So that happened. I then went through another couple of agencies. The ambition for me was always there to be an MD. I think pretty much since I knew my dad was an MD at one point, and so that was always the ambition. I got it.
Your goal, yeah.
Yeah. So I kind of worked through meeting you at Dynamo. I ended up at Momentum. I took a job. And it's kind of like one of my beliefs is that it's an old skateboard phrase for me, which is crash and learn. Yeah. And I basically crashed big time. I was not ready for that political environment. I wasn't ready for them, even though Dynamo had been a fantastic stomping ground, to go into that kind of network play and the politics, particularly because the brilliant thing about something like Dynamo is we were all on the same mission. We were aligned as an organisation. That was kind of a key thing. This business wasn't aligned. It was disruptive. They were, they were working more on conflict, big American, holding companies. So I basically it didn't work basically. So I went from there to Saatchi's, actually on maternity cover, and one of those classic situations. I'm like, okay, what am I going to do next? Might as well take a job. I was going to move down to Bristol actually at one point and go surfing all the time, change my lifestyle, become a dad. But ended up going on at Saatchi. And Saatchi, that won't do any damage to my CV, will it? And then, ironically, from there, it really grew. We pitched and won the Visa Olympics for the activation in the host city. So they asked me to stay and to run that. So I was doing that, which was pretty cool. And then the acquisition of Thomson Murray happened in North America. And I could see the opportunity in that shopper marketing of insight. So I really took that moment and said, look, make me the MD again. I've learned a lot in the last 5 or 6 years, and we'll go from there. So that was brilliant. So I kind of brought together a gang of people, and again,
Saatchi wasn't that you created it, right?
Well, I mean, it was. I wouldn't say I necessarily created it. It was an acquisition in North America of a business called Thomson Murray, which was rebranded, and then the publishing group said, let's roll this out globally. So here's a standing start as a shopper marketing capability in London. Here's a gang of people which we think are the right people to do this, because we don't really understand what it is, but it's retail. And we kind of very quickly worked out who was motivated by that story and who wasn't. And I think, again, the learnings that I had in that, and perhaps where I feel one of my biggest strengths is that I'm able to bring together people who in a lot of cases are actually better than me, because I do pretty much recognize my weaknesses. And if you can motivate them and align them to that same purpose, the opportunity is huge. And there's people in there, if you look at the people who've come through there. Some names like Sarah Todd and Simon Goodall, those sort of people who've done amazing things since then. Emma Perkins, for example, who's now doing something amazing at Lego. There were some brilliant talents there that I was lucky enough to have on that team.
Yeah,
who really made that business fly. And I think that's, for me, that's a really important part of any leader's job. And I often look at myself, as kind of chief talent officer in the whole process. If you're at the MD or the CEO, you've really got to understand that group of people. And often now, particularly going through, I obviously went on to Chale, then decided, got fed up of trying to tell agencies how to be about technology. I went to a client side, a big French software company. And in that was a very different thing. I'm the CMO, and you're kind of looking at it going, okay, this is all going to be about strategy. It's going to be fantastic. I'm going to have all this budget. And I had a $200 million budget. So it was a big chunk of money. But the reality was it was 5% strategy, 45% HR, and 50% politics. And so it became a very different conversation, but nurturing and growing the people to actually get the execution done, which is effectively what you end up doing, became really important. So really that team building process, absolutely key.
And a great experience to then come into OUTFORM, which once again was a slightly different environment that you've been used to.
Yeah, an OUTFORM, I met Ariel, who's the CEO, in a field of wheat in Sweden.
Nice.
Everybody
should meet.
Do it the best. We were both on the absolute vodka onboarding. Great experience. Take you through a field, from a field where they make the wheat right through to the distillery, and you do it over 3 days, and you get to drink cocktails all the way. So, what better way to bond with your future kind of boss? So we kind of decided at some point we'd probably work together, and then at that point they were doing some really cool work at OUTFORM, particularly for Apple. Started to do work for Absolute, some of the more tech end stuff in Apple retail. So the opportunity for us to get together was great, and having had the tech story and not being able to get agencies to understand properly the opportunity in tech, they're all kind of playing at it. To have a business that was grounded in tech, and they wanted me more than anything to build out the more creative and insight-based conversation was just great. Bringing together different cultures, there was a joint venture and a lot of different people doing different things. That again was a moment where we had to really realign the organisation, get it into a single purpose. I've sort of borrowed the Saatchi and Saatchi purpose model to do that, because it's an easy way to get it onto a page.
Yeah.
And that's been another great sort of transformational story. And I think one of the great things I'm really enjoying about OUTFORM is it's a business where I've been able to kind of, in fact, arguably take all the mistakes I've made over the last 25 years and do the right things, because we were in a situation when, I had far greater autonomy than most people would have if you're in a big holding company or a corporate. So,
so perfect delivery.
Hopefully, yeah. You obviously got to carry on, and the old adage of learn fast, sort of fail fast and learn faster is always going to be in play. But the nice thing is that you can, if you do make mistakes, you can change them, right? And you learn from everything. And I think that's really the big point in any of these journeys, is you just take learnings from it.
So it'd be good to understand the challenges you face on a daily basis being MD of OUTFORM, because it's. You've just talked about all the experiences that you've had, and you're able to correct them. But there's always challenges in everything we do, aren't there? So it'd be good. It's been an interesting sort of just over 2.5 years. So I joined the company. It was effectively the merger of 4 different businesses, and we had different motivations. So those kind of, you're actually got to run a business and then realign the business in year 1. Which we kind of got to. And anybody who's running their business, and you're sitting there looking at the bank balance, and you're looking at all the things, all those pressures that you juggle with every day. And if you're an MD or a CEO or however you're structured, 1 minute you are dealing with a client, a big and it's nearly always a problem-solving moment, or next minute you're dealing with with the finance crew. In my case as well, we have we've got a facility in Leicester where we are doing a lot of prototyping, building out solutions for people before we go into any form of mass production or rollout. So you've got all of that as well. So for me, it's a really varied job.
That challenge, if you like, of how you put those things in place have been pretty challenging. And it was good though, and that what I have learned, particularly from the French lot, who had this magic word cadence, which for me was always something on my bicycle, but they would talk about kind of the meeting cadence that runs the organization and how you cascade it through. I brought a lot of that to OUTFORM.
Yeah.
And so I've kind of managed a lot of it through a regular cadence, which of course was completely disrupted by COVID. So my kind of day-to-day and the learnings through all of that have been, I would say, pretty incredible, because I think for a lot of leaders last year, you face challenges you would never face before.
Yeah.
And put new pressures on us where we weren't expecting it. But for me, I mean, in the day-to-day now, we've come through that. I wouldn't, as a result of all of that, I don't really know what my typical day in OUTFORM is, because I'm just kind of looking forward saying, you know, we're about to go into the next normal. It just, you know, it's like, what's that actually going to mean for me personally within OUTFORM? Because I've now got a really strong leadership team in place. We've got a really easy cadence in terms of how we manage the business. Super brilliant, you know, CFO in Jocelyn, who kind of makes sure we manage the outside of stuff. But what's the next big growth piece? So you look at that and you go, okay, you know, where do we need to focus? Where do I need to add my value? We've broken down the business into 3 buckets. We sell kind of services, and then we sell products and solutions. We've got, you know, the think, make, run piece, and we're kind of making ourselves famous out of think. We make most of our money at the moment out of run, and we are very out of make, and we're really sticky with our clients because of the run side of things. So you know, building that model out underneath the 2 brands we now have, which is the Shopper Agency and OUTFORM, is kind of an interesting focus. So whether that means acquisition, whether that means, you know, all those things that are going to come down the line, just organic growth, because at the moment it's really tough, right, doing organic growth. That kind of churn of business really tough. So yeah, classic everyday MD challenge of making sure you're pushing the top line, and then also, you know, managing the bottom line to be to deliver. Good.
So I wanted to move on to something that's slightly more topical. So you work with some huge brands, you know, world's famous brands, you know, the likes of Samsung, Sony PlayStation, M&S. How do you help ensure OUTFORM stays relevant? And as we know, there's a lot of competition out there. Obviously, OUTFORM are pretty unique in my view in one of the businesses I've worked with. But yeah, it'd be good to understand how you stay relevant.
So I think what you've just said in terms of the uniqueness, I mean, it's a challenge right now. So you've got, like, if you look at the competitive set, there's a lot of agencies right now just replicating what's come before.
Yeah.
And they're still kind of behaving in silos. I mean, I kind of giggle a bit when I hear phrases like, oh, you know, it's the ATL agency. I mean, I haven't heard that since like 1985 or whatever. And it's they're kind of the BTL team. So you've still got them behaving those silos. And then what we've done is we've come in and just said, look, you know, that's cool. You know, if you still behave in that way, that's absolutely fine. You can cut and paste your budgets, but where's your problem? And 9 times out of 10, I can go into a customer and say, so I know this about your customer. I've got this a little bit of insight. I can talk to them about, you know, how people are using mobile devices in store. I can talk about the importance of the digital handshake, and they kind of look blankly at me. And then I can say to them, so how many times do your agency bring you a great idea? They just have no idea how to deliver it because they haven't got the experience in technology. They just sit there going, that's so true.
Yeah.
So that's typically where we win, because we end up creating a kind of another layer where we become a technology partner. And then that's sort of built into this service offering around think, make, and run. So when I'm competing in think, I'll be going up against retail design agencies, occasionally the slightly more creative kind of shopper crew. Those sort of businesses in the think, it's very much an agency service. But a client can also buy into it in make. So actually with some brands like Google and Apple, we are more of a partner for technology and making things, because they've got big in-house creative teams. And sometimes in those processes as well, there are, you know, so-called lead agencies that will come in and say, oh, you know, this is what we need to do. So we're pretty clear on that. And also it's important because in many of the solutions we're creating, whether or not that's in store or increasingly online, there are so many other companies that are involved, so many other platforms. If you're connecting an in-store solution through a mobile device and you need to land that lead into Salesforce, there's about 3 or 4 different companies, people in that, that might be involved in that, as well as multiple different stakeholders in the client organization. But most agencies can't navigate that, and that's where we I think become quite interesting to our clients.
Yeah, that's your secret sauce.
I don't think it's that secret. I think it's really obvious, but it's just, if you've got a business that has a legacy kind of creative agency, generally they can't think beyond the work, right? And there is actually, at the end of the day, execution is strategic. And particularly now in the digital world, if you can't deliver, if you can't execute, no reason for doing it. So you have to really think about, how, it's not just not just doing the work, it's actually making it and making sure it's deliverable. And
okay,
and at pace.
And at pace, yeah. So, what have been the challenge? What have been some of the biggest challenges in your product offerings over the last few years? How have your retail clients' demand shifted, and do you stay on and how do you stay on the pulse with what they need?
So I think that's a really interesting question. I mean, we've sort of structured the business around services and products and solutions. So actually what we ended up delivering, and I'll perhaps focus, the services I think are adaptable, right? Because it's about talent, and it's about people, and it's about ideas. So that's kind of adaptable. The piece that's interesting is then the fact that it's our products and solutions, because part of, if you like, our proof point on Dare to Innovate is that we've got our own product offering. And when we're making connected experiences, so we're pretty big in smart home. If you go into a store and you want to say hello Google, it's pretty likely there's a whole lot of OUTFORM technology behind that makes it possible. So we started to sell the boxes that we were doing, if you like, the connective, we call it interactive collection. We started selling all of those products to our competitors and through some resellers. And that's been really interesting, because it's effectively like a kit of parts that enables almost anybody to build an interactive experience wherever they want to build it, whether that's in retail or events or anything like that. So that's been a big initiative, and we've got some amazing products. When COVID came along, obviously we ended up in a kind of safe retail environment. So that the pace at which you have to move from the fact that nobody wants a touch screen and nobody wants to push buttons, because the cost of keeping that clean and the safety issues was huge. So in that moment, we had to pivot very quickly. We actually came out incredibly quickly with a thermometer, facial recognition-based thermometer, which we sold very quickly to a lot of brands globally who wanted people back into retail. But perhaps more excitingly, we developed a whole lot of gesture-based buttons and non-touch buttons, a lot of new sensors. We really pushed voice as well for voice activation. So we could really kind of pivot away from the traditional ways of doing things and then get into a new space. What's been perhaps most ironic for me, particularly given my time at Chale, where we kind of, we did that epic piece of work at Chale. They turned the Seoul subway into a virtual store for Tesco's using QR codes. And for, 2 years of my life, that filled a new business pipeline, and everybody said, is QR code going to be the future of retail? And I was like, yeah, maybe. And it wasn't. Right? It wasn't. Ironically, the global pandemic has reinvigorated the QR code, resurrected maybe even the QR code, and suddenly there's this massive human behavior change around that. So we've very quickly adapted to deliver solutions based on QR codes for our customers. So that can be anything from taking control of a touch screen in store, which is one of the things we're looking at, to turn your mobile phone into a remote device, so you can navigate through an interactive screen from your own device, right through to some of the in-store modes you would have seen, and starting to run a lot of that new behavior that I think we're going to start to see, where brands increasingly look at in-store mode on mobile devices and on their own apps to kind of connect up a new version of retail, which is what the next play will be. Yeah,
I did see actually the new Amazon stores.
Yeah, I mean, the Amazon obviously is great. You check in, everything's based on proximity and cameras, and and that's it. It all goes through your device and off you go.
Yeah,
that's cool. I mean, there should be no reason why Sainsbury's, M&S, all those guys can't do the same thing, because during lockdown we've all picked up those kind of smart scan apps that used to be on little handles. Now they're on our own devices. Obviously, the beautiful thing about the Amazon stuff is you don't necessarily need to scan anything, because everything's got RFID on it, and that's an expensive way of doing it, but it does cut out the cost. So yeah, that's pretty straightforward. I mean, if you're looking at that sort of stuff though as well, I think if anybody's really interested in this sort of tech, perhaps Nike's in-store mode on their app's one of the best. There's a way there that you can get a lot of the information you would have had online in store. Availability, size. You can even ask without talking to somebody to get the product up on the shop floor to try it on through the app. So
nice. I didn't know that.
Those technologies are kind of coming together, and I think it's probably not going to be long before we're all sitting there walking around, the supermarket with a mobile phone holder, which is helping us navigate and taking away the pain of the checkout and many other things. Yeah,
well, it's pretty close. So, how do you find it? Obviously, this is very relevant to sort of the DNA proposition, but how do you find and recruit the best talent at OUTFORM and ensure that they live up to the standards that have been set by you and the global board?
Well, I think there's a few things there. So obviously there's a challenge. I mean, OUTFORM's another brand that not many people have heard of. So you don't say, I said, back in my student days, I'd heard of Saatchi & Saatchi. It's like the only place I've ever worked my mum's heard of. So I wrote to them and they said, sorry, mate, you're not right. So we don't have a natural group of people coming in. That being said, if you like, the way that we built out our marketing offering means we're starting to get people building awareness of our own brand, and there's excitement behind it in the industry. So that is pretty cool. Obviously, we've got a very narrow roster of recruitment people who we spent the time in trying to get them to understand our brand. And so hopefully that brings us, if you like, a constant stream of talent. But then there's a point about how do we make sure they fit into the organization. So the big change, if you like, that I put in is that, it's probably not going to work long term, but certainly I do the final interview now for every single person that joins the business.
Yeah.
And I take them through a lot of the beliefs. Before that, so we use a tool called the predictive index, which gives us a sense of their personality, how they might behave. There's no right or wrong in that, but everybody always looks at it kind of negatively. But it does mean that we can build out, the personalities. So I know that I'm a navigator, I'm an explorer in it rather, and I know that Jocelyn's a captain who's my CFO, and it actually means that we balance really well. And there's, we often fight because I'm off trying to do something else, and but that's just how it is, and it just helps people understand that. So we've used those tools to try and get to the right talent, and we want people who buy into the ethos of the business. And I do share the purpose in there. I do share the values. I make it very clear about how we behave and what we do. And you can see pretty quickly if they think, okay, this isn't for me, that's cool. We just need to make sure that we get the right people on board. I think, I can't remember who said it. I think it was one of the guys from Innocent Drinks. I heard it through him, but it basically had this sort of HR phrase, which is better to have a hole than an arsehole. And I absolutely believe that. I think
my dad said that.
Okay, all right, well, there you go. That's probably what the founding principles of the DNA group, right? But basically, I think that's the piece. So making sure you find the fit. I've just kind of learned over time that I get pretty bored of politics, and I don't like that vibe. So if you can get a gang of people who share the same spirit, have the same values, and are aligned on the same common purpose, you're kind of 95% of the way there, and you're going to remove a lot of 20% of the rubbish that happens in so many agencies.
Yeah, and it's exhausting, negative, and it sort of rots everything, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, yeah.
Cool. Right, on to the future. So where do you personally want to be in 5 to 10 years' time? Now, that's a big question.
No, I mean, I've not, since I got my first business card saying MD, had no idea what I want to do next. But I'm actually heading into a point where my youngest child is about to go to university. So I'm going to be I think the technical term is empty nester.
Yeah.
It probably dates me dramatically, but yeah, it does mean that I've got to probably think about that. And the only sort of target, I mean, when I first got my first job in the agency, the guy said to me, like, what do you want to achieve by the time you're 30? By the way, if anybody's kind of ever gets interviewed me, I still use that question because I thought it was a great question.
Yeah.
And I said an Aston Martin, which I don't think was necessarily the right answer. But he demonstrated that I had a level of ambition, which he quite liked, and maybe I was just a cocky wanker as well. But basically,
who was that?
It was a guy called Eric Watt, and it was in it was an agency called Marketing Perspectives, which I think got bought years ago. Anyway, interesting conversation. Yeah, I think he tried to farm me later as well. He told me to get my hair cut or something. Anyway, but it was. It's one of those things, and you kind of look at it, and I still want, when I see people now, I say, like, what do you want to achieve by your next big milestone? And I'm hoping they're going to say, I want to be sitting in your chair, because that's going to demonstrate that I can think about them joining the business and being kind of what the job might be in two steps time. For me, though, I'll be honest, I'm quite proud of my career. I'm now the kind of the joy, that I can bring. I'm still learning a lot about technology, but I think the joy that I can bring in the fact that I'm happy in my job is the most important thing. There's a kind of a saying that I picked up again along the way. I think it was at Chale, which is, if you enjoy your job, it's no longer work. Yeah. And I think as soon as stuff becomes work, I don't want to do it. So I don't want to be working in 5 or 10 years' time. I do want to be enjoying myself, and that means I'm actually employed doing that. That would be great. Yeah. In the meantime, obviously, I've always felt back going to that kind of. I've realised I'm never going to have an Aston Martin while I've got 3 expensive children.
You're nearly out, so
Well, I don't know. I can't. I don't think it's ever going to go away, and this one's off to an American university, so that's a whole new level of expense. But I would like to find myself at some point. Maybe it's in 15 years' time. In the mountains, and if I could kind of ski, surf, and cycle every day as well as doing a bit of work, I'd be a very happy man.
Well, that there's the possibility there, isn't there? With post-COVID, you don't need to be stuck to a single location, or and with your experience and everything else, there's no point in there gets to a point where there's no point in caging you in, is there?
Yeah, and I think there's fair to that. I mean, there's a brilliant book, if anybody's got a chance to read it, called by Von Schunard, who's the founder of Patagonia, called "Let My People Go Surfing." And I think basically what happened in that, if I remember it exactly rightly, he noticed the productivity go down in the office when the surf was good in California. And it's like everybody was just sitting there going, "Shit, have you seen the surf, man? Oh no, it's a nightmare. I'm not doing any work." So he basically went, "Okay, right, you go surfing and come back later when you've had your session and do some work." And productivity went up, everyone was much happier.
Yeah.
So that kind of blended approach to work, I've kind of applied for a long time. But I think the lockdown thing means, obviously, house prices in Cornwall have gone through the roof. But it's pretty tough, I think, for some people, because whilst we've certainly learned and we've been great, it's kind of changed my approach, if you like, to vertical communication through the organisation. So I end up making these little films every 2 weeks to make sure everybody knows what's going on.
Yeah.
But horizontal integration we got through offices has been lost a bit. So that growth for individuals, the learning through osmosis, all of those things, we've kind of missed a bit of that. So
that's quite important. That's a massive part of culture, isn't it?
I mean, absolutely, it cements culture, but it also, I mean, it's not necessarily so important for me because I'm still mad busy and everything's going on, but there is a level in the organisation, the more junior levels, that really benefit from the learning. And that's the bit that really challenges it, particularly in agencies that for a long time haven't necessarily been able to invest at the right levels in external training. That a lot of it's come from people who are kind of self-taught. They go out and find new things to learn and all this, which is really great. But if you're not in an environment where you can go and find stuff out, you're kind of stuck at your desk going, okay, who do I Zoom bomb next?
Yeah.
You're kind of, it's not so good. So we've actually, I think there's been a few people who've kind of struggled with that. And I think there'll be a benefit of a blended approach in the future.
Cool. So where do you see the agency industry going as a whole?
I'm not particularly positive about agencies. I try to avoid even calling OUTFORM an agency.
Yeah.
Because
OUTFORM's a technology business, is it, first and foremost?
Well, technology. I mean, you talk to an innovation agency. You know, we're basically an innovation company that focuses particularly on retail experience. But I think the traditional agency model is challenged. You could see for some time with the kind of in-house agency model that the opportunities for making profit for your kind of legacy agencies are tough. So I would definitely not want to be a creative agency or legacy. I haven't used the word for ages, but kind of the old ATL model, I think, and any of those spaces, I think, has got to be challenged.
Yeah.
Because clients are reinventing quite quickly, and they're sort of understanding the value. I mean, let me ask you: have you seen any decent TV spots recently?
No.
No, exactly. So you look at it and you sit there, and I mean, maybe having watched TV recently. So you look at it and you think, okay, those sort of agencies are, they're going to be a challenging marketplace to work in.
Yeah.
At the same time, I think the opportunity for big brand thinking is phenomenal, because brands are going to become increasingly important in a kind of the digital convergence right now. And if you look particularly to retail and the ubiquity of the buy now button across almost every channel, anywhere where you don't have a buy now button, and that could be as simple as a QR code, is really a missed opportunity to sell. So there's this new world where I think there's a gang of people who should understand brands, and they should understand the purchase journeys. And if they can start to think, if you could get an old school kind of creative agency to understand that retail was basically just an API that plugged into every single piece of marketing communication, you're probably onto a flyer, because I think that is where the future is. But until you get that kind of generation of leaders coming through who can move away from the kind of the model espoused by Campaign magazine, you're going to be in a pretty tough market position.
So 3 pieces of advice to the younger generation, as in yourself when you started out, what would they be? And I'm expecting some good things here, Simon.
The first one is about perception.
Yeah.
And it's taken me a kind of a long time to learn it. It's been a journey me learning it, but you need to understand that perception is reality. And there's a lot of times when I still talk to junior people and I remember saying to myself, that's not fair, that's not how it is. But you need to understand that is the perception you have created.
Yeah.
And very early on, you need to kind of understand, if you like, the stakeholders in your own career, in any job that you're in, and you need to think about the perception that you create. And I thought that for a long time. After some difficult moments, I thought, actually, perception is reality. And then I realized, after some conversations with some very senior, more grown-up people even than me, that actually perception is reality until you change perception. So you have that opportunity to make that change. And I think for me, that's the kind of the big piece, because we don't necessarily always appreciate how other people perceive us.
Yeah.
And we talk about things like emotional intelligence and all that stuff, but ultimately how we're viewed ourselves and how we react to those people around you is certainly something I think that people need to understand. And then the other ones, next two, well, I guess a big one would be, just as part of that level of self-awareness, is to appreciate that you're not going to be the best at everything, right? And do not be scared of bringing people around you who are better than you.
Yeah.
And that is, sometimes it's difficult for people to do. If they think they're the natural leader, they'll put people behind them who are, not good enough.
Yeah.
And there's I think it's called the Peter Principle or something like that. But basically, it says that you only ever rise to the level of your mediocrity or something. So your inadequacy. You never rise to the top of what you're capable of. You rise to where your point of failure effectively is, or your incompetence level is. So you only get as good as your own incompetence. So if that's the case, if you want to get to the actual opportunity, you've got to find people who can fill in the gaps of your incompetence.
Yeah.
So putting a team around you can do that, for me, it's a big learning, right? Because there's a certain level of paranoia of anybody in a role, and there's always lots of stuff out there of people who fuck people over and try and jump over their bosses, and there are people like that who are sometimes challenge you along the way. But if you can nurture that talent and recognize it, it's cool. And that's part of letting the people go off and do amazing things and celebrate their growth. And then I guess the last one is part of that, and obviously the other side of that is just kind of look after yourself. And if and I've used the phrase already, it's better to have a hole than an arsehole, but just try and avoid, if you can, toxic people. Just don't get involved. There's been too many times when I thought, I'll just take this on, and actually it just drags you down. So
it's been a bit of sport for you, hasn't it? You it's like, in a funny way, quite enjoyed it.
Well, I guess maybe I have. I've always felt like it's like me kind of I'm always trying to. Maybe I'm just trying to teach people. It's like my kids get really annoyed that when I overtake people who just sit in the middle lane of the motorway. I'm like, yeah, but they're in the middle of the lane motorway. I should be in the inside lane. You don't need to explain it to them, Dad. I'm like, no, I don't actually. I should just walk away.
Yeah.
And that's probably a shit story, but it is. I've done that, and it's actually just not worth it.
I get that. So finally, 3 resources, 3 things that you use for self-development, because I know that it's something that you do. You're very interested in.
It's kind of there's 1 or 2 books that I've obviously read. I've Let My People Go Surfing, I think, was the one that's been most influential on me. The other one is a book, and I've forgotten the name of the author, which was recommended, and more than anything, to understand if you do get a new boss, how they might behave, because it's kind of an eye-opener. It's called "So You're in Charge, Now What?" And it's great, actually. If you do get into a new big job, it's basically a whole lot of strategies that other people have taken when they come into new roles and how they've tackled big companies, and that I think is really insightful. In terms of that. And then the other piece I've realised, perhaps a bit late in my life, is the power of exercise and goals. So I think it's very easy, particularly if you're a really driven kind of agency person, as I, looking back, might have been, and certainly at times, to kind of be really totally focused on that ambitious goal in your career, because it's the recognition that you might need, and potentially getting into other things outside of work. Particularly, I found that with physical exercise particularly, but having other goals that means that you can break out, because particularly now with the way with things like COVID as well, you don't really ever stop thinking about work, particularly if you're a significant agent. And if you're running your own business and it's your mortgage on the line, you don't ever stop thinking about it.
Yeah, from the moment you wake up, to the moment you go to sleep.
Exactly, and so you need to find things whereby you can completely disconnect from that. And for me, that level of mega concentration, it happens if you are fully focused. I know, whizzing down a hill or on a bicycle, or sort of those moments where you can just fully break out. And I think
wave.
Yeah, a wave's a classic example. Though I do spend too much time sitting out back because I'm not very fit, kind of going, oh, what's happening to the piano?
You've lost a talent stack of weight. You're like a different, you're a different human being.
Well, I have gone through a personal transformation on that level, I think. Yeah,
you're half the man we knew.
Well, I have certainly removed a fairly, probably a 2-year-old child from my body in the last couple of years. So yeah, that would be true. But I'm
the same.
We're both cliches, Ali. I'm like the cliched middle-aged man in lycra, annoying old ladies in the country lanes of Surrey every weekend.
Yeah, no, there's nothing wrong with it. It's definitely something that I've engaged with. Well, look, it's been great having you on here. Thank you. You've supported me throughout my career. You've supported DNA, and you've become a good friend. So thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you to you as well.
Yeah. So
it's been a great. Yeah, it must be 20 years. Blimey.
21 years.
And I'm probably 10 years older than you, and I've got more hair.
I know. Well, yeah, you're always going to beat me on that.